Kwe, Upsaladik. Hello, welcome. My name is Neil Silcox. I'm the Faculty Excellence Lead here at the Maple League of Universities, and I'm really excited to invite you to the opening session of our Fall 2022 Better Together season, Facing the Future, a Maple League Student Leadership Roundtable. I'm joining you today from Kutchibuktuk in Mi'kma'ki, unceded Mi'kma'ki, and I know you've got folks from all over the country, so I'll invite you to let me know where you're joining from today in the chat, if you'd like. And I will take a moment to introduce the incredible student leaders that we're going to be hearing from today, and then I'll send it over to them. First is Camilla Ritzy, who's a pre-med student with a minor in Indigenous Studies, and she is the president of the Bishop's Student Representative Council. Camilla is also the first Indigenous person to serve as executive of the Students Representative Council at Bishop's. So welcome, Camilla. Sadie Mclare studies community development at Acadia and is a recently retired swimmer with Acadia Athletics. Sadie is the president of the Acadia Students Union. Brendan Roberts is originally from Calgary, but is studying public policy and governance at St. FX, where he's also the St. FX Students Union president and CEO. And finally, Rohin Minocha McKinney is studying biology and commerce at Mount Allison, where he serves as the president and CEO of the Mount Allison Students Union. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's give them a virtual round of applause. I'm going to start with a question for each of these individuals, and then I've got a few other questions, and then we'll also open questions from the group. So please feel free to drop questions in the chat, or when the time comes, you can just turn your cameras on and ask. But to start off, can you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you end up taking on the role of student president? We'll start with Rohin. Rohin, pardon me.
All good, thank you. And before I start, I will say if there's any loud noise in the background, we just got dropped with a big thunderstorm that came in Sackville. So anyone in Sackville knows, like a minute ago, maybe. So if that happens, or if I lose power, we don't know. We'll see what happens with maritime weather. So, but yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rohin McKinney, as Neil described. So yeah, basically I got into this position as president. It was kind of a longer journey, really. I went into university knowing that I wanted to be involved in some sort of like student government, student governance, and leadership, because through high school I was in student councils. I was really involved in our community. So I was like, oh, this sounds like a great opportunity. Maybe it's just like a student council in high school. To foreshadow, I was very wrong. It's not like a student council at all. But ended up me being our first year representative on our students administrative council, so essentially our board for the MASU, and then counselor at large last year as our VP academic affairs, and now this year president. So kind of I got looped in on a false premise at the beginning, and then kept going after that, because I realized that like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. I really like the learning opportunities that I have in it. I sometimes will joke with people and say that I'm I have a double majoring at Mount A in bio and MASU with a minor in commerce. So because it sometimes does feel like that with a lot on it, but a lot of learning opportunities. But yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am now. And yeah, kind of why I guess I'm still here too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rohin. Up next, Camilla. Camilla, can you tell us a little of your story?
Hi, everybody. My name is Camilla. I'm from a small community in northern Nunavut. I came to Bishop's in my second year on campus, since the first year was during COVID. I lived in residence, so I was able to really mingle with the first years and participate in O Week and really get to know the SRC through that. I was a huge advocate during my second year for Indigenous rights and minority rights throughout campus, and to try and decolonize our institution through different ways. I became the lead for the Indigenous Culture Alliance and the lead for the Indigenous Students Alliance as well, I believe. And through there, I talked at a lot of different events that we had on campus and really got into the footing of becoming a leader and an Indigenous leader, especially, and decided to run for president. It was a very, very well supported campaign, and I knew that my people were there to support me. My community here at Bishops was really here to support me and hear my voice. And I come from a very strong background of strong Indigenous leadership, especially my mom. She did a lot of the ground footing work in the Cree Nations and in the Inuit Nations as well. So I'm very glad for that direction, and I'm hoping that I can do the same thing here at Bishops. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Camilla. Up next, Brendan, could you tell us a little about yourself?
Yeah, definitely. So not to copy Rohin, but I kind of also started back in high school, and I was just very involved in student council in high school, and just involved in my community and just broader school. And I'd also sort of wanted to get involved with student government at the university level. I just found that it's a great way to sort of, you know, take what the opinions of people around me are feeling and raise those, you know, to the university or to wherever they need to go. So in my first year, I ran and was elected as first year representative on council. And then last year I served as VP Finance and Operations. And then this year I am obviously president now. So I'm actually I was the youngest executive to ever be on our student union, and then also the youngest president ever elected. So that's kind of what my journey has been. And I've always been very, I guess, kind of grassroots. You could say I've always enjoyed just kind of, you know, going to different events and sort of meeting people where they are and trying to understand what, you know, experiences they have, and then, you know, taking those opinions, experiences, and sort of figuring out how we can move forward, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all trying to do here, is move on and move forward to new things. So yeah, that's kind of a bit of my story.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Brendan.
Yeah.
Last and certainly not least, Sadie, what can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. So nice to see your names at least on the screen and recognize a few familiar names too. So hello to my local Acadia kind of folks on the call. Like Neil said, my name is Sadie Mclare. Use pronouns she, her. I'm in my fourth year of community development. I did a year and a half of science and nutrition actually at Acadia prior to switching into the community development program. And ever since I made the switch, academics has actually been enjoyable for me. So but yeah, I love what I do here. Yeah, I guess a little bit more about myself. I should say too, I'm actually pursuing my honors now. It's been a recent thing in the past couple weeks. So I'm doing code with a side of honors in regards to the housing crisis going on, which I'm sure, you know, is a kind of larger conversation taking place across the nation right now, and doing that research in regards to the housing crisis and how it affects individuals' accessibility into post-secondary education. So I'm very excited to pursue that over my next 2 years at Acadia. But yeah, I'm a little bit more about myself. I'm the oldest sibling of 3 children. I have 2 younger brothers who are my best friends. They're back in Ontario, so miss them a lot while I'm out here in the Maritimes, but yeah, grateful for those relationships. I've been a competitive swimmer, kind of retired, newly retired to the sport, I would say, like Neil said, but I competitively swam since I was about 7 years old, and that was a really big thing that kind of fueled who I was and who I've become. Today, I've kind of latched on to swimming as my major passion throughout my childhood years and teenage years. And then I got into student governance in my second year at Acadia, right before I made the switch into community development. We had our by-fall election in October, I want to say, and there was a position called the community relations representative that was open. And I was like, you know what, I really enjoy working with people. You know, I'm thinking about switching into this community development program. Maybe if I run for this and get elected into the position, it'll like, sway me a bit more to switch programs and out of the sciences. So I ran for that, opposed, and I won. So that was exciting. And then I immediately after I started working in that role on council, I was like, yes, like I think community development is my calling, made that switch, which was exciting. So I held that role in our student representative council for the past year and a half. And then come the end of our term as council, the previous academic year, when elections were coming around, I thought, you know what, I feel confident to run for president, and that who I am as a person has some good qualities that would fit the role of president. So I took that on, and yeah, here we are today. So yeah, and I just want to say how grateful I am to be like sitting with Rohin, Brendan, and Camilla. I'm like have had the opportunity to get to know all three of them since becoming a part of this role, and like can't express enough how amazing these three individuals are, and like how excited I am to just like be here in this conversation with all three of you, because you're genuinely like amazing human beings. So yeah, just much love for everyone.
We love you too, Sadie.
Thanks, Brendan.
Love this. Thank you. You've talked about community, being supportive communities, going out and talking with the student communities that you're in. And I was thinking as I was preparing for this session, and then Rohin mentioned this at the beginning, that Rohin's first year was the first year of the pandemic, and it struck me that for all the students who are on the quote unquote, in huge scare quotes, like traditional university path, the four-year university path, that there won't be any students on that path who were not moving through university in a world with COVID, which has changed everything. And there's a big push, I think, from a lot of institutions to go back to the way things were. And I'm really interested to hear from you about what you are hearing from your communities and your students about what they need looking at the year ahead to make this year as successful as possible. And I won't ask anyone in particular. I'll throw it open to see if anyone would like to step forward and get us going. Sadie.
Yeah, I don't mind kind of starting us off. I'll preface, I'm not flying, I'm not going off. I've prepared some stuff for me, because my mind's been a little chaotic these past few weeks since school's ramped up again and the schedule changed. So I did prepare notes for myself, or else I'll just ramble forever. And I know we don't have all the time in the world. But yeah, kind of with regards to that question, kind of comment, Neil, I think now more than ever, what students need from my perspective, I'm just like talking to my friends and students in general, is compassion. I think the past few years, like most of us, all of our experiences in post-secondary education have been throughout the pandemic, and it's been it's been isolating and it's been lonely throughout our time in life, but in post-secondary education specifically, sitting online like through all of second year behind a screen, and maybe seeing people's faces, one or two people's faces if they turn the camera on, but mainly just names, and it is lonely. And it all is very dependent on people's living situations, and whether some students were living at home, or whether they were living with roommates or on their own, off campus, or maybe in residence as well. So yeah, I'll kind of circle back to my comment around compassion. I think with regards to faculty and staff at our institutions, we need to be going into classes, I think, this year with people who are kind of coming from a humanistic lens and looking at things very empathetically, because the way all current students went into our post-secondary learning journey and are going into it now is very different than had the pandemic not happened. So learning is going to change, and we need people in these kind of more authoritative positions that are teaching us and running these institutions. We need them to be innovative, and they need to be able to adapt to how times have changed, and we need them to not reverse back to the way things once were, because we're different learners. And I think if anything, like that a silver lining has come out of the pandemic is that learning is so much more accessible in many ways than we once taught it or provided it to individuals. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that.
That's really beautiful, Sadie. I love the idea of compassion and empathy being what students need now. And my experience as a teacher was that the pandemic made me see my students more for their as a whole being, as opposed to a little like learning automaton that showed up and then went away for 6 days. And they got to see me as a whole being. And so I hope that I can continue to carry that compassion and that whole what did you say, humanistic lens into the teaching. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Rohin, I see that you've unmuted. You want to dive in?
Yeah, definitely. Because actually my like when I looked at this question of what is something like that, if I could say one thing that students need, it's really similar to both yours of like looking at like compassion and like a whole person, but I kind of frame it as like unspoken patience, kind of like these like that background of students can be able to go to be like, okay, I know I can have like some leeway here and there. For example, I'll give one from one of my friends. It was a second year, near the end of the semester. So like COVID, we're deep into it, into COVID at that point. And this person had, I think, like 4 papers due that week, like really tough schedule. And also then had some personal issues happening around the same time. And really all that they needed for one of their classes was like 3 hours. They needed 3 hours to hand something in late, not even long, and not even to ask to have those 3 hours, just some time that they knew that if something got in a bit late, it'd be fine to happen, because we know that those little things can add up to a big thing. But kind of like to expand on more of what like that means in a broader sense to me is just kind of those like unspoken and really building like a culture in classrooms, and in not just a classroom, but in like university community as a whole, to be patient with each other, going off like what Sadie's saying, like compassion, and really thinking about not just like us as like academic like receptacles, but kind of as whole people. And actually, I see a question in the chat, which I'm going to talk about too a bit, because it goes perfect right now. It wasn't like turn them down at all. It was more like that's what they needed. And actually, in this case, the student did hand like the thing in late, and it was completely fine. Not even a word said about if like an extension was needed or anything, except it is basically on time. But stuff like that, that's what they needed in the moment. And just kind of that like patience, especially looking at all like the external factors that are affecting students right now. I'm thinking about like housing. That's a really big crisis right now. Mental health for students still is massive, still can really affect students, and also financial aid for students and how students are looking at their finances. There's a lot of these external factors that really, as much as I'd love to say someone would devote more time to academics than housing, for example, I don't know how many students would make that decision. So yeah, just thinking about the whole person, but that's kind of my 2 cents there.
Thank you, Rohin. And I love the specific detail of talking about unspoken patience. And it gets to Andrew's question, you know, that I think there's always anxiety in students when you have to ask for an extension, you know, or you're handing something late and you're sort of coming cap in hand, and like, what if they say no, blah, 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 blah. And just creating a culture within the whole university, as you said, of understanding and humanity. That is a really key part. I thank you for sharing that. Brendan, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, it's pretty similar take to both what Sadie and Rohin are saying, and I think that just kind of goes to show that that's really where students are at right now. But and the words that I've kind of been using to describe it is I think students need and want understanding and accommodation, very similar to compassion. But I think like, you know, as we kind of move away from the COVID, the height of COVID, I think students are, you know, we were in a period where accommodation was very talked about and was pretty prominent, but I don't think a lot of I don't think it's really been, you know, truly incorporated into education as a whole, because at the end of the day, we are all here for ourselves. You're at school to get your education for yourself. You're not here for the institution. You're not here for anyone else. It's about you. So when we talk about, you know, alternative pathways to education or taking, you know, maybe longer than 4 years or shorter than 4 years, we're really trying to make it what works for you. That's where that accommodation piece comes in. And an example that I like to use to kind of put that into context is, you know, one of the big sort of pushbacks that I hear from a lot of faculty when, you know, when students are asking for accommodations, whether it's, you know, I had a student I know whose house flooded, and or, you know, there's a student who you know, was struggling with their mental health or a family member passing away or any of these circumstances, and you're asking for an extension on a paper or to push something back. And a lot of the times I find the response to that is often, well, that's not fair to the rest of your classmates. And, you know, while I understand that perspective, at the end of the day, as a student, if I handed in a paper an hour early and someone handed it in an hour late or a week late, I don't know, maybe other students have a different opinion, but I genuinely don't care. Like, it doesn't impact me if I'm handing something in early or someone's handing in something late, because like I said, at the end of the day, I'm here for myself, they're here for themselves. So it doesn't really matter who, you know, where, what, when we're handing things in or things like that. And that's just one kind of specific example. But to, you know, to talk about it more broadly, I think, you know, we do need to be more understanding of one another. And, you know, like we're all saying, look at each other as whole people and, you know, understand that there's multiple things that are impacting our lives. And COVID has been a very big thing in the past few years. And I think if we should be taking anything out of it, it's that, you know, we should really be trying to understand each other and then accommodate when necessary.
Thank you so much, Brendan. And it's interesting, that idea of it's not fair just struck me in this moment, that it frames students as being in this sort of combative relationship with one another, you know, that it's like you're all against each other. And so we have to make a fair playing ground, as opposed to recognizing that the rising tide lifts all boats. And the better we all do, the better we'll all do, even more going forward. Thank you for sharing that example, and thank you for sharing. Yeah, this idea of, yeah, that alternative pathways, as I mentioned at the beginning, we sort of like push those aside a lot in our understanding of what students are. And we're thinking, yeah, a student is a person who shows up at 18, works for 4 years, they do their thing, they've got a bunch of money in a house, it's fine. And then they go off and they give us alumni dollars forever afterwards, you know? And that's there's a lot of other different stories there. Thank you, Brandon. Camilla, I see you're up, Mike. You guys are great on the Zoom, incredible.
Just from my side of the perspective, I'm in a very science-heavy course load, so I get to hear a lot from the science side of the departments, and having labs online and being 100% online to being back at Bishop's. I think we're at 98% of our classes are back in person, and we do accommodate to those who are sick or to those who can't make it, unfortunately. But to have that transition from completely online to in person and having a 50% final with a 30% midterm and 20% assignments, and not having that transition of being back in person, doing exams in person, having no sense of ever done a university exam in person, and that extra layer of pressure. And I'd like to echo what the other president said of compassion and understanding that that transition isn't easy for any, even upper years, who've never experienced that. So I think that really needs to be more understood. And that goes for every program, I believe.
Thanks, Camilla. I really love that idea that there is a kind of expectation about the journey that students will have from faculty that will be a lot like the journey that we had, where there's a kind of pressure, but it's in first year, and and so you build up. But to have students coming back for their third year or fourth year in person with all this, to not shift it is really, is really inhumane. And I think it's true in the humanities as well as the sciences. I come from the theater, the most humanities of the humanities, So, but I see that in my students as well. Thank you so much for all that's happening in the chat. There's great discussions happening. And I will let you know if there are questions that come up. If you have questions for this group, please drop them in. What I will ask, you're all in leadership, in student leadership positions, and as a lot of you mentioned, you've got school as well. You're not just there just being a student president. And so I wonder if you can talk about the challenges that you face in terms of the goals the objectives that you have for the year. What are the big challenges that you face that you hope to overcome in achieving those goals in the coming year? Brandon, go ahead.
I can start off. I think, as you said, I mean, there's obviously just the simple challenge of trying to balance, both school and work. But I think more largely, I think that, it kind of all comes back to COVID, it seems, but as we sort of come out of COVID, I think one of the big things that we're going to need to focus on, especially here, and I'm sure the other presidents can relate, is just, where everything was online and there wasn't as much student engagement and involvement. I think that's going to be a really key piece over the next year, is how do we get back and kind of take back and that engagement and that level of involvement that students had. And I think for the most part, a lot of students want to be involved and want to be engaged with their student unions and just on campus and in their communities in general. But that's going to be the transition this year is trying to put on the events and the things that get people out. And I think also kind of associated with that is there's a bit of a challenge in that post-COVID, as we all know, the world is changing more rapidly than ever, you could argue. And with that, academics and education as a whole is changing, and the way that we view it. And I think that those changes, in where we're trying to make it more student-oriented, student-centered, in kind of the approaches that are taken, I think that's, another challenge that we might be sort of facing this year, where, there's pushback from sometimes the institutions to kind of revert back, just similar to what you're talking about, but revert back to old processes. And of course, there's things we can learn from the past, and I'm sure there's certain things that, were great, but, also we need to look at how we can progress into the future and how we can change and adapt to be, like I said, more student oriented, and ensure that at the end of the day, once again, the students are here for themselves, and we need to really focus on that, because that's the whole purpose of education at the end of the day. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. And yeah, that the post-COVID world is very different. It sort of touches on what Camilla was talking about. The systems in place for engaging with students are often built around, well, in first year, that's when you find out all the things that are happening, and we have systems in place. But if people aren't on campus for those first couple of years, we have to work really differently. And I think I also see that desire to engage and desire to get involved as well. Any other thoughts? Rohin.
I can jump in. Yeah, I guess second is my go-to spot. But yeah, I guess actually one thought that I had that was sparked kind of from Brennan, because I took some quick notes before this as well a bit, but kind of like new challenges that I'm seeing for students. And really this, at least on our campus, a shift in how students are looking at like the student culture on campus really is what I'm thinking about a lot. So for example, 3 years ago in the MASU, every 3 years we do a strategic plan, like how we're going to go. And 3 years ago it was identified like with the strat plan that we did, that like our services are a big thing that needs to be pushed to students, like our academic support, academic integrity, things like our events, like kind of that realm. And this year we're back into strategic planning. And I've already started collecting like data from students about like, okay, what do you want to see? What's happening? And there's a big shift in what students really want. I'm seeing more things with students wanting to be like involved in what our advocacy looks like, involved in pushing policy in the university level, in other levels, which before, that's always what I saw in like our world, is kind of like, oh, that's not really what the value people see as much, but it's kind of what needs to happen. So kind of the shift of new challenges coming up and people really seeing the challenges in their life and really wanting those change, which to me is a big difference. But also too, really when I saw this question, the first thing that I talked about was like challenges in my world is really like time, experience, and knowledge. The big thing I always say at the beginning of my term, I said at the beginning of my term and to my team that if something doesn't get done in the summer, it's not going to get done, because we have 1 year to get everything that we want to get done. And it's hard to have things pass over because you never know how it's going to go for the next team. It's great for innovation because we have almost 100% turnover some years, in multiple years in a row, but not so good for organizational memory and for keeping things going. And that ties into too of like experience and knowledge. I don't have like 1 year to mess up in my position as president and then have another year to really improve on that. I've this year got to learn right away, learn within it all, and try to make the best decisions possible. So, and like having like that background knowledge is sometimes not there, sometimes somewhat there, because we do all have transition reports that we come in with. But since this is about student leadership, that's one thing that I guess I'd love people to definitely know, is that even though like we're all student leaders coming in really passionate about this and we all get transitioned into our roles, sometimes there is that gaps of knowledge that can be really helpful to be filled in from others in our community. Yeah.
Thank you, Ron. I was also really pleased when Sadie was talking about getting to know the other presidents, because it's, you know, it's lonely at the top. You're kind of the only person on your campus with this experience, unless maybe the person who was president last year is still around. And so I'm glad to know that you might be able to connect with one another. Any other thoughts, Sadie, Camilla?
Yeah, I can actually kind of like go off of the comment you just made, Neil, in regards to like it being lonely, because I was thinking about this question, and as soon as I read it, like my first thought was like my priorities are the students' priorities, and that's kind of how I try and like guide myself through this role, because I like really try not to come at it from like a selfish way, or like having, you know, my ego lead like what I do this year with my team and with students. So for me, like the most important part is like not putting like my individual goals into this position and using my position to accomplish them, but going out to the students and seeking what their priorities are and then making those my priorities. So, you know, I mean, it saves me having to sit here and think of them, because I'm going to the students and being like, what is it? Like, what do you want? And, you know, based on student feedback and kind of, you know, I think where I can support students best, that's what I use to guide me through the position. But it's interesting, and I'll like kind of go back on that lonely comment, and how it is really nice to have these folks as friends in life now. But I was having a conversation this summer with one of the governors on our board of governors. On the board of governors. And, you know, after starting to get to know each other over a 2-day kind of event with the board, I was talking to this person and just kind of like relaying some initial anxieties that I was feeling in the position, because it does, it can be really isolating. You can isolate yourself really easily, I think, in our positions. And it's like you acknowledge that you're doing it sometimes, but you don't know how to get out of that cycle. And it can just be, it's overwhelming. And I was kind of saying, you know, I kind of feel the weight. It's like I can see the position in front of me and feel it, and you feel it on your shoulders, and you're like, it just kind of, I tend to kind of, see the big picture right in front of me, and not like see how I can control it more on my end of things. So that's just like overwhelming in itself, especially like that was earlier this summer. So just thanks, Rohin. But yeah, that was kind of my initial feelings stepping into the position, like a month fresh as president. But anyway, so I was talking to this board member, and they kind of looked at me, and they said, and I'm going to read it because I wrote it down because I'm paraphrasing what they said to me. But yeah, so this board member looked at me and they said, you know, Sadie, students voted you in this position because they wanted you in it. I mean, you know, some students don't know who any of the candidates are, and they're just voting for whoever. So, you know, thanks to them as well. But anyways, so they went on to say, you know, and now you're here with a significant amount of power, and opportunity is more, I guess, how a word I would use over power maybe, but they kind of, I guess they do go hand in hand, opportunity and power. And your job is not to hold all of that to yourself and not to use it yourself, but to give it right back to the students, and elevate student voices through the position that you've been given. And that's what your job is. And that's what stuck with me, like, ever since I had this conversation with this board member, and really like helped me, feel more confident in the position, and that, you know, I'm not alone, because the students, like, yes, you know, like I've got president written on my door, but at the end of the day, like, I'm trying to give pieces of that to all students that I consult with, and bring them into the position as well. So that's kind of, I mean, it kind of relates back to how Rohin said, you know, it's high turnover. You do only have a year to do it. And sometimes you are coming into these positions, you know, with not a lot of historical knowledge. My entire executive this year is new to executive positions, and some new to our student representative council and governance and advocacy in total. So you spend the summer learning, you spend 4 months learning about the position, and, you know, what your portfolio is, and kind of, how your annual plan and everything like that. But you step into a position, you know, where there's fragile relationships amongst different student communities on campus. And like, that's something that I've like stepped into and I've seen, and that's something that I feel very uncomfortable with. And that's not okay from my standpoint as president. And I want to do a better job at making students feel represented, at least by our organization. But it's difficult coming in when that hasn't been a priority to past executive teams or the institution at large. So it takes time to build trusting relationships with students who have been underrepresented on campus for a long time and still are. So I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges I've seen since coming into it, and I think will continue to be if students don't prioritize all students on campus.
That's beautiful, Sadie. Thank you so much. You know what I love is this idea of your role as being in service of the other students, and that part of that service is about being really deliberate about going and seeking out the voices of people who rightly so don't trust the system. And what a change it would be if the academic system itself remembered that it was in service of students, and that it had to do that active seeking better. And I think a lot of people who are in the room today who may be part of that academic system, I think are those people who are trying to make that change. So thank you for being here today. Camilla, you don't have to say anything, but I didn't want to leave you out if you'd like to add.
No, for sure. I would definitely say that I was part of that group that was underrepresented, and that's one of the biggest reasons I decided to run. And I do have that added layer of pressure that I am representing an entire community and at-large minorities in itself. From my knowledge, I'm not sure if there's ever been a minority as a president. I'd have to go back, but it's a lot of pressure. And our last team was kind enough to give us some very solid, most positions got some pretty solid transition documents. They created a 5-year strategic plan for us with what to do for the next 5 years. And after this past week, like, we saw how much students wanted to be engaged and how hungry they were about being part of this community and really wanting to get out there and being a part of the conversation. And now it's just it's the time to start having open conversations and figuring out what they want, and to cookie cut it out for them and make it perfectly to accommodate as many people as possible and represent as many. My executive team is composed of probably one of the most diverse we've had here at Bishop's. We have 3 international students, we have 3 people of color, Indigenous students, children of immigrants. Like, we have it all, and we're really able to outreach and to have those conversations. And I think that's very unique here at Bishop's, is that you'll meet people from anywhere and everywhere across Canada and across the world. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, is just to make sure that everybody gets heard, because there's so much that everybody wants to be a part of. So to kind of manage that all.
That's I love that. And, you know, I love the idea of, you talked about being heard and listening. And I think that's part of how you build communities, and also that the university community is really made up of little smaller communities that work together. And it's so exciting to hear about council that can bridge those and help build ties between them that hopefully can go forward. Speaking of listening, I would love to throw open to our audience if they would like to ask a question to any individual or to the group as a whole. You're welcome to put your hand up digitally, or to just flick your camera on, or to, if you'd like to type your question in the chat, I will happily read that out for this group as well. Jenna, you have a question. Would you like to go?
I do. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna Buck. I teach communications and journalism at Bishop's University. I also teach introductory composition and writing classes and communications classes at Humber College in Toronto. And I wanted to, at the beginning of this session, you guys all naturally, you know, when we talked about what students need from us, went to compassion, understanding, unspoken patience. And I think you're all speaking to an issue that I'm really constantly grappling with my learners, and trying to accommodate and create courses that support students in their learning journey. And you know, the issue of students really experiencing distress because under their academic workload, and particularly, you know, we've been talking in the chat about the need for flexibility around deadlines. And we've started as I think you guys know that many people who are attending this session are part of a micro certificate where we're trying to become better educators in higher ed. And some of the works that we're looking at right now are looking at the book that we're reading is talking about structuring courses to better support students learning. And sorry, I'm rambling. I'll get to my point, I swear. Which is that, you know, I think anyways, that a lot of this stress is actually we are creating this as faculty by the way that we're designing these courses. And there's some things about these types of assignments that are creating this need for flexibility, and that this isn't necessarily students' fault, and students' non-ability to manage the workload that we're giving them is that we might have some structural challenges around the way that we're delivering this material to you. And even the book that we're reading right now is talking about the benefit from an equity perspective of having lots of small activities throughout the semester instead of these big, high pressure assignments. And I have a few ideas about why we're seeing so many students being late and struggling to complete their work. It could be assignments are worth too much. Assignments are not clear. We are not communicating with one another. And so assignments are all due at the same time. Or we're not preparing you with the skills to complete the assignment. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want to hear from you about some of the structural causes of like, how can we not be scrambling? How can we not be always, can we give you flexibility? Can we give you more time? Can we give you compassion? How do we make it easier to complete so that we're not being reactive in that way? Sorry for the long question. I hope that was clear.
No, that I think so. Does anyone want to speak? You don't have to speak for, the whole student body. You could also just speak for yourself, Rohin.
Yeah, I don't know if I could speak for the whole student body, but I can definitely, speak for myself. And I think that was a great question, actually. And really, it got me thinking of kind of some of the like difference, like me comparing classes that I've taken, or even heard of like other students and different classes that they've taken and what that like structure was set up and how they were different. And really, I think to the classes that had the most pressure were like those big assignments or big like worth items that were there, whereas ones that had little smaller things consistently, I also too found that like were more like helped my learning more, or more like check-in kind of style, or were more like, let's say if it's a bigger paper is the goal of a class. That's one class that I took. It was a research project and it was a big paper was our final goal. But that being broken up into like, okay, the introduction is at this date, or have an outline of this part done by this date as another part of an assessment, where something that really could be a class that is one assignment, 100% all or nothing kind of thing, was like 10 different assignments that ended up with the same product. But also, like on the other hand, with that too, thinking of it, of having then not more of like little things that are like not easier, but less weight, but having so many of those is another thing to think about. So even looking at how like you talked about communication between classes and between faculty, and having a mix of different types of styles. So maybe a class is one that's structured with multiple, like a couple big things, and another is many of those little ones. Having that kind of dynamic and varied like schedule, I think, is also something to think about. But I like the idea though, communication between classes. Yeah.
Thank you, Rohin. Camilla?
I would just have to say, like, for myself, growing up in an Indigenous community, we had a lot of non-traditional ways of learning, and coming here was definitely an adjustment, because even for our science classes, we always did land-based learning, or for English classes, or for any language classes, there was always a way of style of non-traditional compared to the institutional way. And I think kind of bringing that and veering away from the traditional style of you have to write an essay that's worth 40% and there's no check-in, tell me what the thesis is, and end of story, hand it in, come to my office hours if there's a problem. I think kind of veering away from that and becoming more accommodating, the check-ins. I really like the idea of communication. And yeah, I would have to say kind of get away from the traditional mindset of what an assignment should look like.
Yeah, thank you, Camilla.
Thank you.
Sadie?
Yeah, just like, I guess really quickly to add on, I was smiling the entire time you were talking, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like there's profs who are talking about this. Well, I can actually, because but it's nice to hear that it goes outside of, our very small community here at Acadia. In my program, community development, I think that's one of the reasons why all of a sudden I was like, whoa, academics like is working for me all of a sudden. And it's because you know, we have a very small group of faculty in our program, but the majority of those faculty members consult us in our classes. When Acadia had our month-long strike in February, we went back into classes, you know, in come March, and two of my profs in community development classes took the entire first hour and a half class back, consulting us and having honest and open conversations with students, saying, how do you want to finish this semester? And, you know, being innovative and, you know, not forcing students to just, you know, finish the syllabus as it was with a decreased or an increased timeline kind of. So, and I think because at the end of the day, and I think, you know, Brendan, Camilla, and Rohin have probably all heard this, but in student governance and advocacy, we reaffirm to ourselves, students are the experts on students, because we're in those roles right now. So I think, you know, and not only consulting with undergraduate students, but I think not forgetting graduate students who are pursuing those studies are really informative learners currently, especially like coming out of the pandemic too. I think all of those learners right now are the people who faculty and in the institution need to be consulting with to adapt those learning methods. And like Camilla said, you know, veer off of what has been the traditional way of learning because it's not working. And I think a lot of students agree with that.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Brendan, you want to bring us home?
Yeah. I'll try not to say anything that's already been said, but I completely agree with everything that was said. And just that, you know, as we kind of, you know, it's what we've been saying the whole time, but we really need to rethink the way that we are educating students and the way that we are being educated, because it's just, you know, it's very, it's kind of difficult to be in a position where you're, you know, if you're in 5 classes, you have 5 10-page papers. Well, that's a 50-page paper, right? So that communication that Camilla was talking about is really key, because that's what's going to give, you know, kind of take some of the stress off of students. And then, you know, but larger than that is you know, reshaping the way that we are providing assignments and providing education to students. Because if we are just going to stick with the traditional, what we've done for the past 100 years, has it worked? Maybe for some people, but it has not been working for everyone. And I think we really need to change our mindset on how we are going to continue to educate people, especially, you know, with the changing world that we're living in now. So yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Brendan. It sort of loops back to what Rohin was saying at the beginning about, you know, that the courses with this other way of assessing, you ended up learning more. And I think that old style was of teaching from 100 years ago or 10 years ago, it sometimes is less about making sure that everyone learns and is more about making sure that we filter out the people who we don't want getting through to whatever the next step is, you know? Jamie, Cedric, I saw your hand a moment ago. Do you still have a question, or maybe it was answered, or?
Sure. Yeah. No, I do. I just realized that. Thank you, everyone. I realized that there's a chance my comment was going to sound defensive, which is not the point. I hope not the point of what I'm trying to say. But I guess I'm going to try to shift that to sound hopefully more positive. I really appreciate opportunities like this where we are getting faculty, administrators, and students together to talk about these issues, because unfortunately, a lot of times those things work against each other, right? So like smaller assignments, I can totally understand why those sound awesome as students and probably help you learn better. When you have pressure to have bigger classes, and then you have, like, I teach history, you know, I have pressure to have as big a history class as I can possibly max out. I cannot possibly do small assignments that would make sense in my course that I could give feedback on, you know. So my shift towards like bigger assignments has not been one because I think it's pedagogically effective or more or less pedagogically effective, but has been because of like a response to various other pressures, right? And so this is the part that I was worried was going to sound defensive. I think it's one of the things that's nice at bringing us all together is that we recognize each other as whole humans as well, right? And that's why I really like the emphasis on compassion and understanding, because I hope, and I do see this from students, that you know, that students see us as humans and we see them as humans, and then suddenly maybe we also become more forgiving of some of the imperfections that exist as faculty members of our course design, but also of students, you know, like whatever various different student issues we might encounter. And then also, although this has been hard, this is a tough time for me as an Acadia faculty member to say this, but also trying to have understanding for administrative decisions along the way as well, right? And so I don't know, it's not the perfect answer, but I do like that kind of caring dimension as at least being part of what can at least have us agree that like it's probably not going to be perfect, but what we can ask is be considerate of each other and to do our best, and to try to learn some specific strategies along the way that might make that best be better.
Thank you for that insight, Jamie. I really appreciate it. Jenna, I see your hand, but we're like at time right now, and I want to give an opportunity for maybe some parting words for these people, but I don't want to take up more of their time because they have like important learning to do, so they can get out there and change the world and maybe write a 50-page paper. Do you have, here's my final question for the group, and maybe you could just keep it to a couple of words. And I think we might have talked on this a lot already, but what do you wish that more faculty knew or remembered about being a student?
I can start us off if that's good.
Sure.
Yeah, this one I'll keep brief, and I don't think this is more of a something breaking. Every faculty will be like, oh wow, this is a cool thing that I had no clue about, but more just a reminder that everyone knows is that I think students, especially I see at Mount A, wear so many hats that if it was raining, they wouldn't be able to tell. And I know by also this room too of people, because I know some of these great people here too, that it's the exact same way. Wear so many hats that probably couldn't even see the sun because there's so much up there. So, but yeah, kind of what I wanted to say though, to bring that in, of not just going back to us being like, oh, students are really busy, but like taking some of those hats and bringing them into the classroom, I think is a really big opportunity to have. I know last night I took my first class in commercial law, and one of our first topics was risk management. And when we were talking about it, I was like, oh, I did something about that in a training that I did for my role here in the master. And I was able to loop in that experience and bring it in. And really, I can say I understand risk management a lot better because of having that experience there, and then also bringing it into the classroom. So that's one thing I think I would love if more faculty really brought in to their classroom and thought about.
I love that. Thank you, Rohin. Sadie.
Mine kind of like, I can echo Rowan's comment, and I think it kind of segues into like experiential learning and how important it is, because I think all of us in our roles can now, you know, apply what we're doing and like learning into life and our academics, because it's all like, it's intersectional at the end of the day. And I think that's something we're talking about too in student advocacy, is incorporating more of that experiential part of learning into the classroom. And that segues into my kind of point of, I think, and it doesn't go for all faculty, because the majority of the time, like my classes have always been this way. But there's the few that aren't. And I just wish people would remember that, like, you know, most students aren't taking their education for granted, and we really do want to be here, and we want to be engaged and passionate about what we're learning, and we want to see our profs, you know, passionate about what they're teaching us too. And I think it all comes down to, you know, respect but fun, and making learning fun for people. And we might have to sit down and rack our brains about how we can do that and make it inclusive to more learners, you know, across the Maritimes, across the province and the world. So yeah, that's my final thoughts.
Thank you, Sadie. Brendan, Camilla, would either of you like to add something? Brendan, I see you.
Sure, I can jump in. Yeah, I'll kind of hop on the experiential learning train a bit, because I kind of wasn't even thinking of going in that direction, but it's very interesting, because when I find a lot of the times, you know, I'm in public policy and governance, and talk to a lot of some of the faculty in the department. There's sometimes a bit of reluctance or support from them in terms of getting involved with the student union in general. And I find it interesting, because, you know, here I am, and I'm obviously a fairly unique circumstance, but, you know, I'm here drafting policy recommendations, and then for the government, and then going and lobbying those to the government. And to me, that couldn't be more hands-on, and what I'm learning from doing that is so much more than what I could get out of the classroom. But I just think, you know, if there was a bit more willingness to kind of move beyond, you know, what's traditional education, I think you'd find that students would be a lot more engaged, and I think that it would, you know, create a better relationship even just between the faculty and the students, because, you know, people are wanting to work together on things that they're passionate about. And to kind of wrap it up, I think that at the same time, it's important to remember that, you know, students are people too, faculty are people too, and we really need to kind of look at each other as such, and make sure that we're, you know, having an open mind when we're you know, reaching out to one another, and not just kind of trying to bombard each other with some of the negativity that there has been in the past. And I think that, you know, as we kind of move forward, just making sure, you know, be kind to one another, and you know, don't just I don't know, kind of going rambling on here, but yeah, be nice to one another, and just keep it chill.
Keep it chill. I love it. Camilla, would you like to bring us home?
Yeah, for sure. I want to echo what they all said, but I'll jump on to what Brendan said for sure. And I think that one of the biggest things that I wish professors would acknowledge is that we're still trying to figure things out as students. I'm in my third year, and I tell myself every year that I know what's going to happen. I know which classes I'm going to take. And then by the time it's the ad drop deadline, I'm not sure what I'm doing. There's so much information that's given to you, so many emails that you receive. It becomes overwhelming. And there's assignments, you have clubs, associations, extracurriculars, you have your life, you have a job, you have to pay rent. Like, it becomes a lot. And to just kind of understand that we're still figuring things out, even halfway through the semester. And that's where that patience and that compassion fits into as well. And I think I'm over time, so I'll wrap things up there.
I think that's a beautiful place to finish, and I see a lot of love coming your way from the rest of the presidents. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate you sharing, and I really appreciate everyone who showed up to this conversation. Thank you for doing the best on your campus.